The 13th chapter is called The Fourth Frontier, and indeed, on Rogan this week, we talked about this some. So you, in fact, summarized the frontiers that we were talking about having existed before and what the fourth frontier might be. But I'm just going to read the section. I'm starting a couple pages into the chapter. Again, the final chapter of our book, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. Humans thrive in almost every terrestrial habitat on Earth. We are a broadly generalist species with highly specialized individuals who have shape-shifted and niche-shifted into nearly every environment on the planet. This has meant interacting with frontiers over and over and over again. Here, we describe three types of historical frontiers: geographic, technological, and transfer of resource. Then we will propose a fourth. Geographic frontiers are what we tend to think of when frontiers are invoked: the vast unspoiled vistas, the abundant and yet uncounted resources. All of the New World, North and South America, the Caribbean, and every island near the coasts, was a vast geographic frontier for the Beringians. The frontier of the New World was fractal, so the descendants of the first Americans discovered even more. To the Awanichi Indians, Yosemite Valley was a geographic frontier. To the Taino, the Caribbean was a geographic frontier. To the Selknam people of far southern Chile, Tierra del Fuego was a geographic frontier. Technological frontiers are moments when innovation allows a human population to make more or do more or grow more than they did before the innovation occurred. Every human culture that has terraced hillsides, decreasing runoff and increasing crop production, was confronting technological frontiers, from the Inca and the Andes to the Malagasy on the Haute Plateau of Madagascar. The first farmers in China, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica were doing so, and the first ceramicists, who dug clay, formed it into useful shapes, and fired it in coals, were doing so as well. Finally, there are transfer of resource frontiers. Unlike geographic and technological frontiers, transfer of resource frontiers are inherently a form of theft. When people from the Old World came across the Atlantic and landed in the New, they may have at first imagined that they had stumbled upon a vast geographic frontier, but they hadn't. In 1491, the New World is estimated to have had between 50 and 100 million people in it, with uncountable distinct cultures and languages. Some people were living in city-states, among astronomers, craftsmen, and scribes, others as hunter-gatherers. To Francisco Pizarro, the Inca Empire was a transfer of resource frontier. To the instigators of the rubber boom in western Amazonia at the end of the 19th century, the Sapporo territory was a transfer of resource frontier. And once the Sapparos were thus weakened, their longtime competitors, the Waorani, moved in as well. In modern times, transfer of resource frontiers are everywhere. Oil drilling, fracking, and logging in ancestral lands, predatory lendings with subprime mortgages and much student debt, the Holocaust. One symptom of transfer of resource frontiers is tyranny. Geographic frontiers represent the discovery of resources heretofore unknown to humans. Geographic frontiers are inherently zero-sum. There is a finite amount of space on this planet of ours, and we will reach the end of it. Technological frontiers are the creation of resource through human ingenuity. Technological frontiers are temporarily non-zero-sum, specifically positive-sum, and this can appear to be a permanent state. But there are physical limits. A single electron is the theoretical minimum needed to flip from one state to another in a transistor, for instance. Transfer of resource frontiers are theft of resource from other human populations. Like all frontiers, transfer of resource frontiers are ultimately zero-sum. Theft has its limits. Even thieves must obey physical laws. What choice do we have but to continue seeking new frontiers and more growth? If our addiction is just a special human case of a pattern that characterizes all species that have ever lived, are we not simply condemned to ride this destructive trajectory to the end? We have written this book in part because we believe the answer to that question is no. Humans are obsessed with growth because it engenders bigger populations that, if nothing else, have farther to fall before going extinct. But large populations also pose a hazard to themselves if the resources that enlarge them are finite or fragile. In such cases, moderation is the key, but it only works if our drive for growth, our individual perception of it, is sustainably satisfied. We have run out of geographic frontiers, or nearly so. Technological frontiers, by turns dazzling and disappointing, come with risks, beware Chesterton's fence, and are ultimately constrained by available resources. Transfer of resource frontiers are immoral and destabilizing. What then are we to do? Where to turn to find salvation? In simple terms, consciousness. Consciousness can point the way to a fourth frontier. Once again, the human niche is niche switching, and consciousness is the answer to novelty. Living sustainably on a finite planet is a hard sell, but we can and we must find a way. We have no choice. These problems of novelty require humanity's urgent attention and cannot be solved by the goodwill or hard work of individuals. We moderns have become a threat to our own persistence. We are built to figure out how to move between modes of being. It is time to rise to collective consciousness and prototype a way out of this. We face some significant obstacles. Humans, like other creatures, are obsessed with growth, and we are capable of driving ourselves extinct in the pursuit of it. Even though it is logically obvious that we must accept equilibrium, we are not built to be satisfied with it, because being unsatisfied has been an excellent strategy for the last several billion years. There is a character trait of individuals that may be critical to finding the fourth frontier, or rather, its adaptive foothill that could lead to a society-wide solution. That is, pride in craftsmanship. An artisan who takes pride in the quality and durability of their work is enacting some portion of a fourth frontier mentality, one in which the lifespan of a product is as important as its function. A table or sideboard made by a local craftsperson is not beloved merely because it is more beautiful than what can be assembled from a box bought at IKEA, but also because the person in possession of a lovely and functional piece has a chance of handing it down to their children, or other kin, or friends. So too would we like to be able to deliver unto the next generations a lovely and functional world. The fourth frontier is a framework, therefore, that can be understood with an evolutionary toolkit. It is not a policy proposal. The fourth frontier is the idea that we can engineer an indefinite steady state that will feel to people like they live in a period of perpetual growth, but will abide by the laws of physics and game theory that govern our universe. Think of it like the climate control that allows the inside of your house to hover at a pleasant spring temperature as the world outside moves between unpleasant extremes. Engineering an indefinite steady state for humanity will not be easy, but it is imperative. I have one more to share about the Maya before we end today, but we've done a fair bit of media so far, most of which is not out there about the book. And I thought we'd end up talking a lot about the sex and gender chapter, and there have been a few podcasts that we've done, and we'll be talking about all of these, that have specifically focused in on that. But it's been interesting how many of them have ended up being about this, about the society level decoherence and how it is that we can find our way out.
Well, I think it's a mirror, actually, for one of the errors that we point to about evolutionary theory as we find it today. And I guess I need a little leeway here, but the idea is that one has the sense, based on what evolutionists typically say, that evolutionary success is synonymous with reproduction, that producing more offspring is better. And of course, we can back that off slightly, but in general, that is the conventional wisdom. And it's the conventional wisdom for a pretty good reason, which is that the real thing that selection is trying to accomplish, it's not really trying to do anything, but if it were, it would be trying to lodge genes as deeply into the future as possible. And one way, so 0 is what we call an absorbing boundary. If your population goes to 0, it doesn't rebound from it. So one way to not hit 0 and therefore fail to get into the entirety of the future is to have a lot of individuals, right? So reproduction is very closely tied to many of the things that make you evolutionarily successful, but in and of itself, it's pointless. So the point here is there are a lot of problems that we face, right, that are in some way downstream of our perceptions that selection has awarded us in order that we can navigate. But the purpose of it is all the same. Right? The purpose is to get into the future. And so the reason that many of the things that we have talked about really ultimately point to this question is no matter what problem you solve, it doesn't much matter if you don't solve this one, right? We have an obviously unsustainable trajectory. The hazard we now pose to ourselves is so immense that if we don't solve it, there is nothing to do, right? You could turn hedonistic and you could say, all right, let's just have a party because there's nothing to be done about this. And, you know, there's a reasonable argument to be made. But I think, again, as with the question of can you drive this pathogen to extinction, we don't know. There's nothing that has been provided yet that tells us we can't get out of this. And in fact, the one of the major themes of the book is that what we do, what our species does, what it is built for more than anything else is getting out of jams and figuring out what to do in the new situation that nobody knows anything about. That's our niche.
We're so good at it, even when the jam is one that we ourselves have created. But we have now created a series of jams, to use your word, that we have not only created, but are modifying at such a rapid rate that it's really hard to see our way out.
And we've done some things that make it less likely. So the problem that we have is we have now taken what we have as tools and we've put them in a system that has its own evolutionary dynamics. Our political and economic system causes, for example, those who have done something that has created, let's say, a technological frontier and have therefore become very wealthy, have the power to prevent change. And so we talk about this need to rise to collective consciousness in order to begin problem solving, to figure out how to get out of the pickle we find ourselves in. But the problem is we now have an opposing force, which is, for anybody who's succeeded brilliantly, change is frightening, right? Because unless that change is under some kind of control, if you're a winner, change can turn you into a loser. So there is this natural tendency to frustrate change. And the problem is it's of no value to anyone to preserve things in this state if this state is self-terminating. But there's a game theory problem where those who oppose change actually retain and concentrate their fraction of our collective, or their disproportionate fraction of our collective well-being. And, cynically speaking, even if the world must be saved from these processes, somebody who opts not to participate in that saving phenomenon, right, they actually end up better off, right? So the game theory, the free rider problem applies even within the category of elites who might group together and decide to point us in the right direction. So anyway, our final chapter is really about, what does this puzzle really look like if we free ourselves from the narratives that we are handed that in large measure frustrate our ability to see where we are and where we might go.
And part of what you were just alluding to is that the stable state will not be static, that it is easy for people to conflate stable with static. And there can be no stable state for humanity in which humans are actually feeling a sense of purpose and progress and happiness and productivity, which is static and which can also true that it therefore cannot be defined in advance, and that definition will remain the same.
Right. And in fact, it will be subtle to many readers, but what we say about the fact that this state cannot be blueprinted. We literally do not know enough to say what the state will look like. What it must be is navigated towards, right? Yeah. That we will learn, we will bootstrap, we will prototype our way to this new state, which also implies some other things. And this may be unsettling to people, but this is a multi-generational process of navigation, right? The amount of change necessary to reach a steady state that truly does fulfill the human desire for growth without needing to find new sources of growth, right? That process, let's say it takes 3 generations, right? That means we're not likely, those who are old enough to be paying attention to this podcast, we're not likely to be in that world, right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the process of going there, we have been falsely told would be a matter of austerity, right? Oh, you want the world to function better and be safer, you're going to have to give up a lot of stuff. And I think this is complete nonsense, that actually we lack meaning and useful things to do, and that a world in which we actually set about trying to figure out how the future should be would be a world in which there was plenty to do and lots of meaning. And, the fact that you don't live to see the final state doesn't make any difference, because it actually would be a better world almost immediately upon our setting about this journey.
Yeah, and asking people in the West, asking people in the weird world to embrace a policy of austerity from here on out would seem like an obvious ask, given the relative wealth that we enjoy and the resources that we have. But it is also true, and we write about this in the book, and I've written about it elsewhere, that the meaning that we find in life is mostly not in our stuff and our our relative wealth, and that it is therefore not in the weird world where you tend to find the people who have the most sense of purpose and meaning and devotion to people and love and ideals that do provide meaning. So giving up stuff feels really hard for people right now, not because we're a bunch of selfish, greedy jerks, but because most of us are actually recognizing at our heart that no matter how much luxury and comfort we may be surrounded with, there's actually something real missing. So we can do this, you and I argue, Brett, without giving up a lot of the trappings, but also argue that it's not the trappings where we're actually going to find the meaning. And what we need to do is create a way for people to re-find the connection and the meaning. And of course, I have to update my calendar, but the last 18 months, 19 months now has taken away so many of the opportunities that people did have. Some of what we were talking about last time, the experiments and the opportunities for collective joy, the parties and the festivals and the carnivals and the sporting events and the intimate gatherings and the chance meetings on the sidewalk that turn into a long walk that turns into an evening that turns into a relationship, right? Like these things are much harder to accomplish in an era of restrictions and lockdowns and requests for compliance with rules that have just been handed to us without an explanation for their justification, honestly. And so what we have had are meaning taken from us, and that's hardly new, but it did accelerate over these last 18, 19 months. And before that, as we talk about in the book, some of the accelerators are, the usual suspects, the screens and the junk everything, the junk food, the junk sex, the junk entertainment, the ability of advertisers to hook into our short-term endocrinological systems and give us our dopamine hit or our serotonin hit, rather than us being able to resist the dopamine hit and the serotonin hit and look towards the joy and deeper pleasures to be found in the non-junk versions of food and sex and entertainment and meaning making and adventure and creation and discovery and all of these things.
I wanted to maybe refine one aspect of that, because I do believe that part of our problem with sustainability has to do with the amount of material and energy necessary to make the world work. And we are going to have to cut back. But the point I want to make is that is not going to feel like austerity if done well, right? So I want to raise this issue. Buckminster Fuller had a very ironic way of making this point. He had this term that he coined ephemeralization. And his definition for it was the process by which you can do more and more with less and less until eventually you can do everything with nothing. Which, it's a beautiful Fullerism. But in any case, the point is, think about something like...
It almost sounds like homeopathy, though.
Well, the point is, the very last bit is an ironic twist, because it is not absolutely nothing that you can do it with. But the point is, it can be minimized. A nanomaterial can have great strength with almost no atoms in it by virtue of geometry, right, of the structures. And so anyway, I would just point out, this is an evil, dangerous device. We all know that, right? But at a technological and material level, it is a marvel, right? How many objects, what does this weigh? It weighs, 3/4 of a pound or something, right? And it's a rather marvelous camera. It's a video camera. It's a telephone. It's a
compass and a
book.
Wayfinder.
It's a library like none that has ever existed on Earth, right?
It's a lot of things that actually don't even have a name separate from it.
Right.
Or separate from the revolution that it accompanied.
Right. And so the point is, it's not all the way to ephemeralization. It's not a heads-up display that emerges out of no material that you're carrying around.
Thank God.
Well, right. But my point is, the number of atoms in this thing is many, but it's not many relative to the number of objects it replaces. And so... It's
a lot fewer atoms than an ENIAC, which did a hell of a lot less.
Yeah, did effectively nothing. Right. I mean, it calculated things like trajectories for bombs and stuff that, it's a trivial calculation by modern standards. But that's the question, is how do you deliver the animal, which is what we are, how do you deliver it the somatic sensation of this is a good, safe, functional world in which I am liberated to do the things that actually make a difference to me and allow me to make the world better, which is really what the objective, we have this cruddy system where if it makes a profit, then we sort of imagine that you probably created wealth. And
there's value in that if it made someone some dollars.
But there's so much market failure where your profit was made and it really wasn't that you made the world better. You just externalized harm onto somebody else.
It's externalities all the way down.
All the way down.
Often.
Right. So many negative externalities. So the question is, well, you may not be able to instantiate it, but ideally what you'd like is an economic system in which you got paid when you made the world better, when you actually did create wealth, and you didn't get paid for creating negative externalities or any other exploiting market failure of any kind. And so we have two levels of question. And in fact, I won't go into it, but I do think it's important to separate out the question of what structure would make the world function from the question of, is there any way to get there? Because the answer to, is there any way to get there, could be no. It could be that the obstacles that those who oppose this because they find it threatening are too strong and you can't get there. But it doesn't change the importance of the question about what would a functional system look like. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, we need to recast this in the public mind so that people understand that they are not being told that they need to live like monks in order for us to get into the future, because that's not it. They need to retool their expectations a bit. And, what we say in the book about the fact that it's always spring in your house, and that's really what we're talking about. We're not talking about either anything that violates any known law. The spring in your house doesn't violate any known law, because when it's hot out, we cool your house with an air conditioner that slightly heats your backyard, right? It all makes sense. You just keep the coolness on one side of the wall.
Yep. And as we talked about on Rogan, when you change your diet to something that is better for you, your physiology and the gut microbiome that you have on board actually changes, so that you come to appreciate the thing better. And what he raised, which hadn't occurred to me, but the way of marking progress in martial arts being a change of color in the belt that you have, adds value without coming with much of a cost. And those are the sorts of solutions. And the same thing with pride and craftsmanship that we also talk about in that section that I read from, finding value not just in the minimalist reductionist version of what the thing is. Well, all I need is a chair, and therefore I need something that holds me up when I try to sit. Okay. Are there other things that a chair could offer you that would provide more value, and the construction of which would therefore also provide more value for the person constructing it? Of course there are. We've all sat in garbage chairs and better chairs, regardless of how, of your surroundings. You've sat in variable quality chairs, and the quality isn't just about the comfort. It's also about the level of construction, and you can intuit something about what the thought was that went into it.
Yeah, whether it's garbage chairs or garbage trucks. I mean, the fact.
Some of us have not sat in garbage trucks, except by that use of the term garbage, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
One way or the other,
it wasn't a garbage truck, but I had a not too awesome truck there for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in grad school. It was okay.
It was all right.
It was, but yeah.
It went from here and often got to there.
It usually did. Yeah. F-150 for those of you who wonder. Anyway. An old one, though.
Do you remember people used to say friends don't let friends drive Fords?
I do. So we actually...
I have no idea whether that still applies. Fords.
Well, we started hearing that after we were literally in a Ford Bronco that caught fire in the middle of Nebraska in a snowstorm, and we had to abandon it there, which is a story for another time. But then much later, I ended up with this Ford F-150 that was old and rusty in Michigan and all this, but it got me from here to there.
Yeah.
And it often got my bike there too. So it was fine.